Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. I'm Adam Huss, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. I'm celebrating a bit because this is the 100th episode of the Organic Wine Podcast. By reaching this milestone, I've achieved a goal that I've had for several years, and that feels great. But now that I've achieved it, I realize this is just the beginning. As I look back over the past 4 years of interviews and the relationships they've inspired, I'm humbled and overwhelmed with gratitude. What started from a passionate desire to use wine to help this planet has grown into a personal revolution in thinking. Rather than an education, it has been a process of unlearning what I thought I knew, a series of disillusionments that have revealed how incorrect my assumptions were about the world. I've begun to realize this is a process that will continue until the day I die. Wine has bewitched me in a way that few other things have. It has led me on a path of reconnection with the beauty and wonder of nature, and has connected me with others, like my guests, and like you listening now, who it has similarly enchanted. The irony may be that we think wine is this liquid that we put in bottles, when it is really this magical elixir that uses us as its vessel to communicate its message to the world. This message isn't something I can tell you. If there's anything 100 episodes has taught me, it's how simultaneously powerful and limited words are. The words of 100 different voices and perspectives may begin to point to a fraction of that message, but these words are just narrow bridges across a canyon so deep we can't see the bottom. When we speak of wine, or vines, or trees, or winemakers, language forces us to express them as individual words, nouns, but we have come to know that they are actually vast systems of ongoing relationships. Since we are limited to this paltry language, maybe thinking of wine as a verb rather than a noun can help to be more accurate. To wine, or to vine, or to tree is to communicate in a certain way a myriad of interconnected relationships that continuously flow through the world. We aren't actually humans. We're humaning. I think when we begin to see this and understand who we really are in connection with all of nature, we become better stewards of this world. And the wine, that verb that infuses us with a very real kind of magic, becomes more delicious. Anyway, this is what looking back on 100 episodes brings out of me. Thank you, as always, for indulging my ruminations. Thank you for listening, for engaging with me, for teaching me, and for your support. My guest for this episode is Isabelle Legeron. Isabelle is the founder of the Raw Wine Festival, which, if you haven't heard of it, is the premier natural wine festival on the planet. She's also the author of the book Natural Wine, an introduction to organic and biodynamic wines made naturally. Isabelle's career is dedicated to promoting the same farming-first wine culture that I want to cultivate with the Organic Wine Podcast, so she was a natural choice for the 100th episode. This episode starts with some personal revelations from both of us about why we do what we do. We talk about how Isabelle tries to avoid dogma and debate about the winemaking that happens in the cellar, and focuses instead on the need for organic farming to be the greatest priority in natural wine. I challenge Isabelle about some of the limitations of natural wine, as well as her take on blind tasting, natural washing, and the benefits of participation in the Raw Festival. Isabelle is a champion of vignerons who take the risks inherent in farming and winemaking without chemicals. She forged a space for these folks in the wine world and really created a home for natural winemakers when they were misfits and outcasts from the mainstream. Now that natural wine is a bit more mainstream and perhaps a bit diluted with bandwagoners, she continues to insist on a foundation in beautiful, chemical-free farming that stewards the natural world and honors its beauty. In her words, natural wine is a gorgeous translation of what nature is capable of, and that's why she continues to love and promote it. Enjoy. Isabelle, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really excited to be, on this podcast with you and be able to chat all things, I guess, natural.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is what you've become known for probably for better. I think you probably want that. And I'm really excited to talk to you about all of those things and everything that you're doing. I mean, I want to start with like a little personal note that I think you'll relate to as a lead in. A month before I was born, my great grandfather died of cancer that he and his doctor attributed to the sprays he used in his orchard. And I've been like, my family has compared me to him in many ways. Like I joke sometimes that I'm, partly my spirit is partly reincarnated version of him. And I like to think that in some part, that has animated me to be an advocate for a better way of farming. I know your story and journey has some similarities, and I'd love it if you'd like to share what led you into this world of natural wine and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's actually very similar, and I'm really sorry to hear about your granddad. For me, I mean, in a way, it's the combination or the crossing of many roads. One is my upbringing. That was very much, I was very much a farm girl, and it was very rural, and pretty much whatever we ate, we grew, and the way I was brought up was really focused on the rhythm of the season, or the seasons. And and I have a deep respect for nature, and I love foraging, and that's really thanks to my parents and our way of life. And then but I never really, and I was brought up on a grape farm, so we grew, we farmed grapes. And
Okay.
then I just went off to university because I never thought I'd work with my family, so I went off. um, and then and then I studied a whole bunch of stuff, business, and I ended up in London. And then when I was 28, my dad died of lung cancer, which you know is related to the way he ended up farming, because he when I was born, they were organic farmers, and then, like many people in Europe, progress towards, well, what they called at that time progress, and swapped
Right.
manual harvesting for machine harvesting, and then they started using more and more pesticides and fertilizers, and really very heavy use of chemicals in the vineyards. And I think that's, in the end, that's what killed him. And that was a little bit of my kind of wake up call, where I thought, I really need to understand what's happening in the world of farming, and I should reconnect with my roots. And I went back to studying, wine. Ended up doing the MW, the Master of Wine, which I passed, I think, in 2008 or 9. And then very quickly, I was looking for people who were farming the way that I was, brought up with when I was a kid, and that's what led me to organic farming, and then natural winemaking.
Yeah. And I I've heard you say in other places that you're militant about the farming. Would you still characterize yourself that way? Like that this is what is at core? And I mean, what I love about your book on natural wine is that's what it starts with. That's what you emphasize. And I think that's really important. And I think it's probably the most overlooked part of natural wine, sadly, in the market. Um,
Yeah, it's 100%. And I mean, thank you for bringing that up, because for me, the farming is the most important part. At the very beginning, I would say 15, maybe a bit plus years ago, I was like, really, everybody has to drink natural wine. Now I'm like, everybody has to farm organically, because that's the most
right.
important. The way the wine is made, in the winery, is, I think, is more of a stylistic question, and a choice as to how you want your wine to taste like. But organic farming shouldn't be a choice. We should all be farming organically, because that's what's important. And I think, if for me, that stems from a deep respect of the living. I really, really fundamentally respect nature, and the great order of nature and the beauty of nature, plants, animals. For me, that's incredibly important. And farming organically is, at the very minimum, is a way of respecting, this greater order and this harmony, and life, life in the soil, life in the vines, life around it. And yes, we should, we can't talk about natural wine without talking about organic farming.
Yeah, I mean, And yet it happens all the time, sadly. I mean, I know for you and I, that's we never separate those two. it I wish that was the case out in the world as well, but we'll get into that.
So,
Yeah, I
it's a sad state of affair that now we talk about natural wine, mostly because it looks funky against a luminous background, and it's Instagrammable, and it's cloudy and in a clear glass bottle. This is
right,
so
exactly.
we
Right.
reduce that wine to that conversation, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like you. I really don't care what you do in the cellar, and I mean, the way I put it, it's like that's a personal and philosophical choice, but the choices you make in the vineyard are global, or vineyard or orchard, wherever wherever you're getting your fruit, are global and environmental, and affect everyone on Earth, and and all nature. I mean, since we're going down this direction, it sounds like your perspective has evolved. Can you talk about how your perspective has changed over the last 10 years or so, or since you started down this road, and maybe even just what from your perspective is the state of natural wine now?
Yeah, I would say maybe 15 years, over the past 15 years. Well, I think I've realized, you know, that I guess I've become more informed, and realized the importance of farming very simply by tasting, because I think if apart from the value of of not using not non-pollutant farming practices and regenerative farming and so on, but I think if you love wine, and actually if you taste wine, you realize that the greatest wines come from the greatest vineyards and the greatest farmers. It's very simple, and I think we talk about the debate of whether you should add sulfites or not sulfites, and which again are for me are not that important. I mean, don't get me wrong. I drink very specific wines, and I drink wines that are alive. And actually, I don't drink wines that have more than 30, 40 parts per million of total sulfites. But that's my personal choice. But I realized that in order to make really amazing, long-lived, terroir-driven wines, you need to have a farming that is really impeccable. You need to protect your soil life. You need to protect the biodiversity in your vineyard, and so I think from that, it's for me, apart from, again, we're not even talking about the environmental side of this conversation, but from a wine lover's perspective, if you love wine and if you want to taste really great wine from a taste perspective, you realize that it has to be, the wine comes from the farming and nowhere else. You can't lie,
Yeah,
and I've seen, having followed growers for the past, many years, and I buy a lot of wine and I sell a lot of wine, natural wines made without any sulfites. And when I follow their journey and I taste year after year, you realize that the work that they're putting into the vineyards really pays off, and it really speaks, in it does translate it in the glass. So I think it's a combination of multiple things. But I guess I value more and more that, the work in the vineyard, and then the respect for nature, and how that goes hand in hand with producing great wines.
yeah. It's well, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people approach natural wine from the bottle and the glass. I mean, obviously, as a consumer, most consumers come that way. Not everybody is a wine vineyard or owner or wine wine grower. But maybe the analogy that makes the most sense is sort of, it's very easy for us to understand how the best food starts with the best ingredients. And if you personally are growing a garden of fresh tomatoes and peppers and all herbs and all the things that you love, and you're growing it organically, and then you bring it into the kitchen and you put it all into the blender and then bake it and then filter it and then you know you're like, why did you go to the trouble of growing all these beautiful fruits and vegetables if you're just going to process the hell out of them? It's like, of course, when you do that process as a chef, you as a cook, you want to highlight those flavors. You want to pare down and use the freshness and beauty of your produce to to be the highlight of the meal because it's so delicious on its own. Like that's the quality and the pleasure that comes from eating that food. And I think it's a really good analogy for wine. I think a little bit of what you're saying is that it's like we don't have to focus on the production side of the wine, but if you have great farming, that's just going to come naturally because you don't want to mess with a beautifully farmed fruit. When you turn it into wine, you want to showcase all that beautiful farming.
But also, I think for me, the greatest natural wine producers or low intervention wine producers, even if they add a little bit of sulfides, and the greatest farmers are also really, really nice people who really respect nature, people you can sit down and have a conversation with, honest people. I think, making great natural wine is also is a journey of the heart more than a journey of the head, because I think you really have to trust nature more, more than anything else. You have to trust that, if you put the work in the vineyard, then you'll get, the crops. And of course, there's the challenges of weather conditions and so on. So I'm not minimizing those at all. And then you bring in your grapes, and then you have to trust that the microbiology will do its work, and that time will do its work. And I think it's so also making great natural wines, or wines with very low intervention with organic farming is a hard journey, and I think that's also really important. It's more than a choice, because it's full of risks, and you have to be prepared to take all those risks, and lose everything. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
you're a winemaker, so you produce wine, so you know exactly
Oh
the
yeah.
challenges every single time.
Teeth gnashing, hair pulling stresses of whether you're going to screw something up or whether something's going to go wrong or right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this brings up you've used the term low intervention a couple times now. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, obviously we can use it sort of casually, but are you happy with that term? Do you wish there was a better term?
Well, I mean, we look, I'm. So I wrote a book called Natural Wine. So
Right.
I'm very happy with the term natural wine, and I use the term natural wine. But for me, natural wine means, a wine which has been made, with organic grapes and without using any additives, and harsh processes. So it's like 100% grape juice. Um, there are some wines, like wines that come to the fair organized, raw wine, that people will add sulfites. And for me, these are, low intervention organic and biodynamic wines.
No,
Y-
I meant the term low intervention. I don't know.
I
I've
think
been thinking natural wine. Yeah, I wasn't really. I mean, we can get into that for sure, but I just meant the term low
uh,
intervention. You're
yeah, I mean, I use it all the time. I've never really thought there was a
oh,
problematic
okay.
term. I think it's quite clear. Um, No, I don't have I don't have,
Okay. Yeah.
but it needs to be defined. It's the same as
Well, that
what
was
do
my
you
next
mean by
question. Yeah.
intervention? But what do you mean by natural wine? I mean, that's, and we can go back to the beginning of your question, which was, what's the state of play, or how things have
Yes.
evolved. And
Yes.
my I guess if you look back 15, even 10 years ago, where making natural wine for producers, it was a big deal, because actually finding a market was a really big deal. And if you run a business, which when you run a vineyard and you make wine, you run a business, you have to find customers. And 10, 12 years ago, it was really hard to find customers, whereas now it's a lot easier. And I think as a result, natural wine has become, a marketing buzzword, which is why we're seeing a lot of, which is why we're seeing everybody's, not everybody, but people are encouraged to bottle their wines in clear glass, where, that clear glass, well, you can't use recycled glass to make a clear glass bottle. So by the sheer nature of using clear glass, it costs more to the environment, it's more expensive. But yet this is kind of the where we're going, in terms of natural wine being so beautiful, Instagrammable, and funky, and so on. And that's, for me, that's a shame, because we are losing the heart of what natural wine is, which is as sustainable as possible. We should we should talk about the farming and the work in the vineyard. It shouldn't just be, oh, I'm making natural wine. I've got a very colorful, funky label, and I've got a clear glass, and therefore it's natural wine and it will sell. And I think that's a little bit the danger at the moment. And it's encouraged by everybody. It's not just the wine drinker; it's also the distributors. It's the whole chain, because everybody wants to sell their wines. But I think we need to sort of pull back a little bit and remember what a great natural wine is. Even if it's under, if the label looks very classic and the bottle is not transparent, but the wine inside is great.
Yeah.
And there should be a market for that, and that's becoming more difficult for these growers to sell their wines. If they are more
Yeah.
on the kind of classic looking packaging, for example.
Do you, do you think we need a definition for natural wine, or do you think that this could be solved by just requiring ingredients listing?
I don't know if
Like, is
ingredient listing.
transparency all we really need?
I mean, I know you're obviously you're a proponent of ingredient listing, and I mean, so am I. I think we should have both. In a way, I don't
Yeah.
understand why we've never required um, wine not to have ingredients listing.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. It's the only foodstuff really out there where you have no idea of what you're buying. So I think that would be really helpful, and we should demand it as consumers. We should demand that we know exactly what we're consuming. It should be a right. And yes, I think there should be a definition for natural wine, absolutely. And I know a lot of people are against the definition, but I personally quite like clarity.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like it would help. I mean, and I mean, I've started using the term natural washing because of, the things that you're talking about, where it's like just lack of transparency and relying on sort of a reputation or just marketing to be able to be included in a group that that really, if there was definition, you'd be excluded from. I see that a lot. I'm seeing it more and more, like you said, these days. It's really interesting. I love that you think about things like glass bottles, that you think holistically about the whole, like natural wine means more than, so much more than just what you're talking about. Like these values transcend into the whole supply chain and all the logistics involved. Me too. This is the way I think.
It's
I
really
might
important. Yeah.
yeah, I
I,
might have some good news for you. I think there's I just heard about some new technology that allows pretty much the collection of any bottles to be, and label removal and washing at a fraction of the carbon cost of creating new bottles. So and it would allow for any bottle basically to be returned and reused through this system. So
That's
I think
amazing,
yeah, I
because
think there's some good
there's a
news
real
coming.
shortage. As you know, there's a real shortage, and I know that certain growers have to buy 1, 2, 3 years worth of glass in advance just to be guaranteed a price point and
Yes.
stock,
Yeah.
which is really insane.
Yeah.
But I thought there was issue in terms of washing it so it meets the regulations, and that was the biggest sort of blockage in terms of that technology. But it's great if it's being
Yeah,
resolved.
it seems like they might have figured it out. Yep. I mean, I'm talking to a company right now that I hope to sort of highlight on the show, so I'll keep you posted. I'll keep everybody posted. Yeah.
That's amazing. And the carbon footprint is and the journey is really important, and having a look at holistically at what's going on, I think is really important. I mean, we had an audit of our fair, but that was just before it was just before COVID, but we had an audit in terms of what was our carbon footprint. Like organizing an event in New York with everybody traveling to New York and so on. And I mean, of course, it's it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly the data now, but we started down that journey because I think it's important for any businesses to understand what we're doing. Like that's why we stopped printing catalogs, because they were so heavy on the environment from a paper perspective, from a weight perspective, from a transport perspective, and developed an online sort of technology so that people could take their own notes and all of that. That was as a result of realizing that what we were doing was quite heavy.
Yeah.
And we also did a lot of audits with our growers in terms of the whole journey from the production to shipping samples to coming to the fair. How can they offset that carbon, and so that's something that I'm actually really interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be curious. I would love to find out what you find out about carbon offsets. The people I've talked to who have really looked into this have found it's very dubious in most cases. If you try to get auditing on a lot of these things, it's very, very difficult, and there's a lot of unknowns still. So a
Mhm.
lot of that carbon offset stuff seems like we should be super skeptical of it. I'll just throw that out there, but I'd be very curious to hear if you find anything different than that, because
Oh, you mean in terms of like planting trees, or what do
well,
you mean?
to actually, like, I mean, there's lots of companies that offer it, and then if you follow their sort of auditing to find out what is behind what you're paying for, the substance behind it is lacking in a
Oh,
lot of cases,
yeah,
and it's not auditable, and whether you're actually doing anything good with that money that you're paying for that carbon offset is
yeah,
questionable.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. No, well, that's true, and I mean it's become another business. So
exactly. Right, yeah. Well, let me ask you a sort of a hard question, because I come from natural wine from you know Southern California, which is a unique place, and one of the problems, and you've mentioned that, as in talking about wine right now, you've used the word grapes and vineyards, and for example, I use prickly pears in some of my wines, and so and I also don't own my vineyard, so the farming that what I can do is support the kind of farming that I want to support with the dollars by buying those grapes. But you know, it seems to me that natural wine grew out of a European model that was very grape centric and very climate oriented to that area. And if you it for example, I see a lot of people trying to make natural wine in California, and this is getting into some sort of technical chemistry stuff with winemaking, but it's very difficult to achieve ripeness with the kind of pH that is necessary to make a natural wine that's stable and sound in California, especially in certain areas. Some coastal areas it's much easier, but like any of the warmer areas, it can be very difficult, especially if it's not your own vineyard, if you don't get to choose what gets planted there, if you're relying on purchased fruit from even somebody that's farming organically. I wonder to what extent, is does natural wine limit really where you grow and what you grow essentially to make it? Because I mean, I was throwing that out there with prickly pears, which like the chemistry of prickly pears is insane. It's like sort of like adding water. It's trying to ferment water with sugar in it. So it's very difficult to not have that just spoil instantly, if you just let it ferment on its own. Uh,
mm,
so and I mean, I'll just throw this out there. What I love about natural wine is that it has really made a whole new generation of people question the way we define wine. Like, it's really opened people's eyes to, it isn't just this Eurocentric, grape-centric thing. But with that, I think we're bringing in a whole lot of other variables that natural wine is difficult to, it's difficult to keep the reins on within the realm of natural wine without some sort of supportive, what I would call supportive winemaking, to ensure that the wine doesn't literally just become vinegar or something like that. I'd just love to hear your thoughts about those kind of issues with natural wine.
I mean, I think a lot of people do it pretty well though in California. I mean,
Oh
there's
yeah, oh yeah.
a
No, not
lot of
to knock those
growers
folks. Yeah,
who manage to source the fruit. I mean, I think probably the most successful ones in terms of the quality. I feel maybe could be the people who are actually involved in the farming themselves. So they farm the vineyards themselves, and then you know obviously do the picking and the winemaking. But I think that there's an exciting generation of growers who are farming amazingly well, even if it's not their own vineyards, and then managing to make 100% natural wine, or maybe adding some a bit of sulfides. But in terms of are you referring to like rectifying acidity and things like this, or because I think a lot of people are managing it without having to rectify acidity, with picking dates, maybe sites, maybe
yeah.
different with
I
grape varieties.
Well, if I was, yeah, I mean, the way I would put it is sometimes it seems like you have a choice between making natural wine or making good wine. because of the chemistry of the fruit. Like, I mean, I looked at a vineyard that's certified organic that I know some natural winemakers use. I'm not sure what they're doing. Maybe they're blending with other grapes. But if it was my only source, I mean, the pHs at harvest are so high at even at very low bricks. So it's like, if you want to have a balanced wine, you already have a pH that's like close to 4, which is essentially microbially unstable. Like, it's going to become vinegar. It's going to have a lot of issues. Um, and there's no way to pick it, which is, sort of the timing of the pick is really, if you're not going to add acid or something else, is really the only control that you have. And there's no way to pick it. Like, you could pick it green and you would have the right pH, but essentially once it goes through veraison, it's dropping acid so fast because it's a hot climate. And so, that person, let's say I'm the owner of that vineyard, my choice there would be either to not make natural wine or to just make crappy wine if I decided to be strictly natural. And so this is where I think, like, natural wine may be limited to specific areas. Like, it might be much more limited than just like you can do natural wine anywhere. It seems like it could might necessitate that you have specific parameters in your wine and the region that you're growing your fruit.
Yeah, but maybe that also begs the question of much wider, of a much wider, I guess, context if you didn't have all the tools in the box,
Why are you
I
growing
do
grapes
believe
there?
that a lot of grapes shouldn't be grown where they're growing, and a lot of grape varieties shouldn't be grown where they're growing, and there's a lot of sites that are not suitable for winemaking.
Yep.
So,
Yep. No,
so
totally agree. Totally agree. This
you,
is
you
like
know,
no, this is like the conversation I have with people talking about organic on the East Coast, and they're like, "Well, sometimes like organic, farming organically is worse than just maybe 3 sprays of a systemic chemical fungicide." And I'm like, "Okay, great, maybe so, but then it begs the question of, like, maybe we just shouldn't be growing grapes that need to be sprayed at all in those regions. Like, why do we have to do?" Great, why do we have to grow this here? Like, why is this a necessity that we farm with chemicals in order to do it? Like, why don't we grow something that doesn't need that? Yeah, so I take your point. That's
but
actually
I think, to go back to your question about, is natural wine a European model? I mean, there are plenty of regions in Europe where, the you know the wrong grape variety, so to speak, has been planted just because it's fashionable and it looks better on a label. So in that sense, it's not that dissimilar. If you look at Greece, and the amount of European grape varieties that were planted there, and for what reason or what purpose. And I think equally in California, there are plenty of sites and old grapes and Mediterranean grapes, and I think we it's just as a society, as consumers, we've wanted the Chardonnays and the Pinot Noirs and the Merlots and the Cabernet Sauvignons, rather than focus on Cinsault and Carignan and Grenache and Grenache of all colors, are that
yeah.
are actually really adapted, or mission that is really adapted to the Californian landscape. And but on the other end, I mean, I know of plenty amazing growers in California that do a terrific work in the vineyard and manage to make natural wine. And so I think it's not just a European
No, no, no.
model. Uh,
If I could characterize what you're saying, I think it's really beautiful, which is you need to, like, it has to take in a much more holistic perspective. Like, it's we need to be thoughtful about what we're planting, where we're planting. Like, that ethos is a part of it, part of this idea, is part of what goes into it. It's like growing the right thing in the right place as well. It's not like you can just slap on a winemaking style onto anything grown anywhere. You have to be thoughtful about from the get go, from when you're planting and picking a site to plant.
but
Um,
also, sorry, but
no, please. Yeah.
I think we, look, we're in a way we're pioneers in what I consider myself a pioneer in some respect, and I think a lot of natural wine producers are pioneers, and they're brave women and brave men who also go against the tide and decide that actually, no, Carignan is not, maybe not very sexy, or Cinsault is probably not very sexy, but actually this is what I need to be able to achieve a natural wine, to make wine without resourcing to, added acid, or whatever it is. And I think this is what's really amazing about the natural wine scene, whether you're in California or Australia, Canada, or France, or anywhere, is that we are, we're also choosing grapes and sites that have history, that are meant to be there, that, we're championing, in a way, grape varieties, obscure grape varieties, in a way that were never championed before, because we acknowledge that if these grapes have been around for hundreds of years in that particular site, is because actually they're really well adapted, and we're not trying to sort of necessarily, you know, follow consumer trends and so on, because this is not what it's about. It's about following nature, and it's about being at one with nature, and listening to what's going on
Hmm.
in that vineyard, on the ground. And and that but that takes being brave, and particularly, like 15-20 years ago, that took being very brave. But still now, you are swimming against the tide, but thankfully now the consumer, or the wine drinker, the wine lover, or however you want to, call it, is more adventurous, and now believe, they believe more and more in ethical businesses and environmental values, so they're more prepared to follow. So it's getting easier to get people to drink a Cinsault or a Carignan than it was 10 years ago. But that move is still very brave, and that's also what I really love about all the growers and makers who produce these wines, is that, they're incredibly brave, and modest, and I think that's what it takes, to just decide that actually I'm not going to use that site because it's got Cabernet Sauvignon and it's not really adapted to what I want to be doing. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think also, you know, that's
Yeah.
also, the values are important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I I love that. um, I mean, I still have a challenge with some non-grape fruits. Like it is one thing to pick the right variety, but I mean, this is just maybe a very edge case, but and look, I'm learning. I'm at the beginning of learning how to work with prickly pears, but I'm this is a fruit that is native to here, that grows well here, whether it rains or not, without sprays. So it's like a very, it's a beautiful
Mm.
fruit, I think, in many ways. However, its chemistry ain't great for winemaking. Maybe that means I shouldn't be making wine with it. That's a question. That's a potential.
I'm sure there's some indigenous Californians who used it in some ways, and managed to make booze out of it. So I think you just need to.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm looking into that for sure. It's definitely been used for sure. I mean, it's got, very old names in central Mexico and the
Yeah.
Southwest for sure. So it,
I did. It reminds me of I did a stint in the Caribbean a few years ago. I was working on putting together the wine list in like an eco resort, a natural wine list, which was really amazing in Saint Kitts. And I was there, week, 2 weeks at a time, like every 2 months. And because one of my other passion is making vermouth or bitters and things. So I actually fermented. I went round the island and I bought everything that I had no idea what it was at the market, or collected, because we were on it was a big plot of land, and the owner was fanatic all about planting fruits. And I fermented everything there, from pineapple to, uh, well, obviously coconut, and then with all sorts of local spices and barks, and so on. And I'm with you, some fruits fermented beautifully and I could do something with it. And then others it was just
yeah.
flat out
Yeah.
revolting on its own. So then I made,
Right.
well, something you could try, because one of the fruit that didn't ferment very well, I made like a port style, and I basically stopped the fermentation very early on with local rum.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that was actually that was in a way that became one of our signature drinks. It was quite delicious.
Yeah, no, I've definitely thought about that. And it might be one of the old ways that they used to make it was fortifying it. I so I'm definitely looking into that. But yeah,
Well,
no, thanks.
ice cream, prickly pears makes an. You should speak to Derek at the All World Winery. He makes the best ice cream out of prickly pears I've
Yes,
ever tasted.
I had some. He shared some with me. I know. I love that. Yeah, no, I mean, it's an amazing thing. Like don't get me started on prickly pears. I think it should be grown much more widely in California. It's
Mm.
perfect for it here. It's native here, and it does much better than grapes with our climate in many areas, and is seriously useful. The seed oil is incredible. The fibers from it are incredible. So it's just like the whole plant. You can eat it, drink
Yeah.
it, the whole
Uh,
thing. Put it on, cook with it. It's amazing. I so this is just something I've been thinking about lately. You're a master of wine. You had to go through a whole process of being giving a lot of time and resources and energy and money to blind tasting and being tested on that and needing to pass that to become a master of wine. I'm anti blind tasting. I'll just be very upfront about that because I think it decontextualizes wine. I'm not sure how it has any practical use. I know that the mindfulness that it brings is great, and that learning how to carefully taste is great. I don't know that we need to have like the two main wine certifications, the Court of Master Sommeliers and Master of Wine, dedicate so much time for people who are just learning about wine to this practice. I think it's a huge waste, and there are much better things that people could spend their time on. I'm just being totally upfront to you. What are your have you ever considered that? Have you thought about like do you see any benefit in it? Does blind tasting, has it helped you in any way? Do you find it? Do you think it should continue as a thing that we spend so much time on?
yeah, I mean, the master of wine is not just about blind tasting.
Oh,
That
definitely no. Yeah, yeah, no, for
is
sure.
all part of the qualification. But
But you can fail if you don't pass. I mean, you can be prevented from getting
it's
certified if you don't
Yeah,
pass blind
it's part of it.
tasting.
It's part of it. Yeah, for sure. But look, I mean, I actually loved studying for the Master of Wine, and I actually excelled at at the blind tasting. I was the best in my in my year, and I got the Madame Boulanger Award for it. Um,
Uh,
because and why I think it's useful and I actually still use it is because when you have no information and you only have what's in front of you or what's in your palate, and when you become very 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 good at it and you can taste the wine and then in your head you know how much alcohol, the level of tannins, the type of tannins, if they're wood tannins or if they're fruit tannins, what kind of fruit tannins they are. You you just you just learn a lot about wine in a very very different way. And I think to some extent, the natural wine world, I think, could actually have more classical training, because when when you have to taste so many vintage ports that you understand what vintage blind you're tasting and why, because of that, that particular year was particularly hot, and or whatever.
yeah,
You i I think it gives you a classical training and a classical understanding of wine. And of course, I'm not talking about, of course, a lot of the wines we taste, most of the wines, in fact, all of the wines we taste, would have had, added yeast and so on. So you do have that to take into consideration. But I think it's incredibly useful to have your some classic knowledge of wine. And I think the blind tasting is just an exercise that helps you get under the skin of wine. It has its limitation, like I said, because we're looking at quite a conventional way of making wine.
yeah,
Um, but I found it really useful, and I actually really enjoyed it. And it's blind tasting in the MW format is a very intellectual exercise, because you taste the wine and then you have to write pretty much two or three A4 sheets, as to why you think that why wine comes from that particular place. So you have to write an argumentation. But in order to be able to write this argumentation, you have to know the acidity profile of all your grape varieties. You have to know the tannic profile of all your grape varieties. You have to have an understanding of climate in different regions, and the kind of terroir and so on. So it's not, it's not just about blind tasting and saying, oh, this is a Cabernet Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon from whatever. It's about acquiring the theory behind it in order to argue your case for why you think this is that wine. So it's the whole knowledge base behind the blind tasting, which is really fascinating because it
Yeah.
has you learn a lot about about your
Okay,
classics.
that makes
And
sense.
I actually,
It is
and I
fun.
feel
I'll
that.
definitely grant that. It is fun. I
Well,
enjoy it.
well, it is fun, but also, don't you think that I don't know. Sometimes I'm in front of somebody who's pouring me a wine, and if and yes, very often, wine sommeliers or servers or are they're very knowledgeable about that particular wine and how that wine is made. But I find that often, I don't know. I think sometimes there's just a lack of understanding of more classic regions, which I think is essential, because even if you just want to work with natural wine, I've had to learn all the Burgundy crus and tastes through all of them and different vintages, and same with Bordeaux. And even though I would never drink a glass of Chateau Margaux ever again, but knowing what it tastes like, I think is just part of the education, and I think it gives you an understanding and a knowledge and a perspective on wine. So I'm not saying everybody should do it, because it's a bit of a it's a bit of a bitch to do. It requires years of training and discipline, but I personally actually I'm really happy I did it,
Okay,
and it
good.
gave
Yeah,
me a
yeah.
lot. So.
All right. No, I hear you.
And
Yeah.
look, this such a classic institution created, me. So in the wine world, it's not that bad.
That's right. That's right. Well, and probably your sensitivity um, helped in some ways. I mean, I'll definitely grant that like, I mean, clearly, if you were top of the class, so to speak, in the tasting, you are a sensitive taster. You're somebody with a very good palate in terms of identifying those things, and I know that will definitely help in terms of whatever it is that you are going to do. Oh boy, my cat is here now, so hold on a sec.
Bad. No,
Okay.
but it's also we don't taste with our palates really anymore. We don't talk about texture. And I think it's really important to put wine inside your palate. And for me, when I taste a wine, when somebody applies to come to the fair, and send me samples, and I get a lot of samples. I put the wine in my palate and I listen to the wine. I don't really care where it's from. I don't really care who made it and how it's made. This comes later. But I put a wine in my palate, and I look for terroir. I look for authenticity. I look for texture. I look for, is the wine filling up my whole palate? Is it a donut? Is it, and all of these are from quite a classic training. But I look for the balance, the length, the intensity, the complexity, and all of these are literally what the MW was about.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. It's not just about tasting the wine. Okay, here are the flavors. Do I like it? Does it look pretty? Uh, there's, because
Yeah.
people spend a lot of time crafting that wine, from the farming to the winemaking. I mean, you know better than me. And I think it's important to taste a wine properly once. I mean, I don't, if you give me a glass of wine, I'll just spend that like 2 or 3 minutes getting to know the wine and thinking about it and stuff, and then that's it. I've got the wine in my head, and that's that. But thinking about the terroir, the texture, the viticulture, you can taste viticulture. If you're really thinking about the wine from a technical perspective, but also from a sensual perspective, you can pick up on viticulture. And for me, that's really important. Has there been any careful viticulture in that wine? Can I taste the terroir? Can I taste the complexity, the intensity, the authenticity, or not? Because you can taste all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely, I'll drop it. um, no, I just wanted to get your thoughts. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry. Well, here they are.
Exactly. No, it's great. I really appreciate it. Um, well, I want to talk, obviously about raw. And I want to say just, I love that you require applications, and that people submit actual, chemical analysis of their wines for entry. And part of the reason I really love that is I've realized how serious a problem lying is in the natural world. Or maybe I should ask the question of that. Have you encountered that as much as I have? Or, like I said, natural washing. But really, like people who allow themselves to be carried along on the natural wine tide, so to speak, but absolutely are not working with organic fruit. Like just straight up conventional vineyards. And great. So they don't, they just do a wild fermentation. But that's where I guess natural wine has come to in some places. Like if you can say, oh yeah, I don't add yeast or whatever, then great, you're part,
Mm.
or whatever it is. Sometimes it's just being sort of blessed by the right people in the right, in the right circles to say, oh yeah, you're one of us, and then
Mm.
you get in, and then you basically get a pass on whatever you do as long as it doesn't cross like certain lines, like adding yeast or something like that, which I think is the
Yeah,
least you could do.
yeah. It's, I mean, look, our system is not foolproof. I'm sure there are people, who come to the fair who lie or who use non-organic fruit. Um, you know, I think it's very hard, because you can't really. There's certain things you can't test for anyway, from a physical perspective. Even if you send it to the lab and spend hundreds of dollars, you might not be. You can't really at the moment. You can't really test for a natural wine. But what we do is so ask for analysis. People fill in a questionnaire. I taste the wines, and then actually the most efficient is to talk to people in the community, neighbors. So I ask for names of people who know them, who are already pouring out raw, and then by using all these methods, you sort of you do the best you can. But at least we do it. I know a lot of fairs don't do that, and when I see sometimes I've seen analysis of people who are pouring at other fairs, and I know that their sulfite totals are off the chart. They're above 100 and parts per million, or which is fine. But I think at least we I try and do the best I can to get a selection of growers that I think are who they say they are. But it's not, no system is foolproof. We're dealing with human beings, so
Yeah.
it's,
Yes.
people lie. That's true. But also, the other important thing is people are on a journey, and because I often get criticized for having a limit of 70 ppm across all wine styles in terms of total sulfites. That's the only additive that we allow. Um, but for me, it is a journey, and I don't think everybody should be making sulfite-free wines, because not everybody wants to, or is prepared, or can do it. Because again, I think that's it's a mental hot place. You have to really want to go down that route. And I think it's okay if you want to add a little bit of sulfites. If you're a brilliant farmer, but you actually want to make wines with sulfites, but you're happy to declare how many sulfites have been added. I think there's a place for people like that, because for me, like I said, farming is the most important. The key is to be transparent about the winemaking, so people know exactly, okay, there's been this amount of sulfites used in the wine. This is something that I want to taste or buy. Then that's a different decision. But I find that people who, particularly when you look at countries like, I don't know, like the Czech Republic or Slovakia or even Austria or Germany, which traditionally, you know, for example, sulfite usage was quite, it's quite a cultural phenomenon to use elevated levels of sulfites. And I find that people need to be in a place where they can taste the wines, different wines made with lower levels of sulfites, where they can meet buyers. And over time, over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, people really really reduce levels. And I think that's really important to accompany people in that journey, because that's our job. I mean, for me, I see myself as for raw wine is a place where people can meet like-minded people, exchange ideas, learn together, grow together, meet make business connections, sell more wines, and get more
Yeah.
confident, and better farmer, and in a way, a more confident, winemaker. But that takes time. I mean, you only get a shot at it once a year. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. Um, so yeah, so that's why for me it's important that raw wine is a place where we welcome growers are on that journey. People who are really established, been making a natural wine for 400 years, like Domaine Le Puy in Bordeaux, or somebody who started 2 or 3 years ago, when actually they're just finding their feet, and they need to sell their wines, because if you don't sell your wine, you don't have a business, and if you don't have a business, you can't grow, you can't learn, you can't get better. So
Yeah. Thank you. No, that's great. I love the idea of the fact that we're all in a journey. It is, it's funny. I look back at some of the episodes that I started recording 3 years ago, and I'm like, oh wow, I'm a totally different person with totally different ideas, and it's like almost hard to remember where I was back then, and now I'm like very adamant about where I am now, and I have to, it's a good reminder to go back, to have these things on record, to know I was a very different person not too long ago, and I have to be humble about that. I've learned a lot and changed a lot, and grown and incorporated new information as I've gone along, and it's, hopefully just, keeping that thinking evolving and adapting and learning is part of the whole process.
And also not to forget that we're all in the same boat, because this is what really I find difficult to get my head around, is this these different factions of, we are really hardcore natty, and it's got to be, just pure grape juice and nothing else.
Yeah.
um, or, at the end of the day, we're the citizens of this global planet, and we're in big problems. The environment is not doing great, and we have these huge issues that we're facing, and really we should be focusing on trying to convert all farmland. But we're in the wine industry, so for me, I want to see all vineyards being converted to organic farming. This is how we can help with pollution, with sequestering more carbon, because if you stop plowing, and if you stop tilling, and if you just keep cover crop, you keep the carbon in the soil. So that's obviously really really important. This is we the reason why we I do what I do, and why I in a way, for me, raw wine is so important, is that we're creating markets, we're getting people to understand more about organic farming, natural wine, getting people to drink more and more of these wines. So we're growing a segment, which means we're helping growers convert more vineyard area, or maybe buy more fruits that they can help convert to organic, because that's the other thing. Like, for example, you talk about California, but a young grower starting, or young maker, they might buy conventional fruits to start with, and then they build that relationship with the farmer, and then over time they convert to organic. That's important. That needs to be supported, because that's a very important part of the work that needs to happen. If you just only buy wine that is completely natural and made from organic farming, because the farmer is great and decided that that was the way forward, that's brilliant. But there's also that gray area in the middle, where we have to all work together to try and improve farming globally. So that's also really important, and that's why we can change things. I always say one glass at a time, but it's true. As we grow, and as you convert more and more people to drinking you know wines made from organic grapes and made as naturally as possible, then you are a contribution to the
Yeah.
environment and to the global crisis.
Let me ask you more about raw. I love attending festivals as a drinker, but
Mm.
as a producer, like as a small producer especially, it's become, I've started looking at the finances of it, and it's very difficult for me to justify it. Can you talk about, you know how is what are the benefits to somebody attending raw? Who does it benefit most? And
Well, you should ask growers that to come. But I think the way I see it, and from the feedback I've had, it's raw wine is a place of business, primarily. So
uh
it's a place where you meet distributors and importers attending from. I mean, so typically if we're in California or New York or Montreal, or we have buyers who will attend from all corners of the states. So importers, distributors, we have shops, restaurants, bars attending. So it's a good place to get, well, to grow your business. I mean, a lot of growers, for example, even in California, have said to me that thanks to raw, they've been able to grow, they've been able to find new markets, they've been able to sell more wine, and therefore start producing a little bit more wine every year. And then you also meet members of the public. And I think for me, from the beginning, I've always been really clear that we need to engage with the wine drinkers. It's really, really important, because they're the ones buying the wines. They're the ones who've driven the natural wine movement. It's not the wine industry. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
we have a few key importers who've been there for a long time and who've done amazing work. But really, fundamentally, on a global scale, who's been driving this change, is the person who's spending 25, 30, 40 bucks on a bottle of wine. And so, and it's really important that they get to meet you and that they get to taste the wine, and that you can, in a way, you can build, brand loyalty, because it's them who will go to the shop or to the restaurant and ask for your wine. So I think being part of Raw is I mean has been, it's also about, I guess, it's building your brand. It's a marketing exercise. It's a lot of growers have found importers in places where they haven't even exhibited, just because they were on the website, because we get about 50,000 users a month on our website, like unique users, people looking for growers, finding out about the growers, the information, because we have a very complete database of growers and their wines, and that's kind of, in a way, that's the sort of like the part that no one really talks about. But over the years, I've rebuilt the website 3 times, and I'm rebuilding it a 4th time at the moment.
Wow.
It's actually a huge website, even
Yes,
if it
yes,
looks
I've
like much.
noticed. Well,
And
there's
so
a back end, there's a front end. I mean, there's the user interface, but then there's like the admin side where, producers have accounts and have to, maintain their accounts and submit reports and
yeah.
applications.
I have a team of 2.5 people who are just like web developers,
Right.
who are on the website every day. 2.5 people.
Yeah.
Um, so but it has a huge benefit, because it's a big source of information, and then I know that a lot of people use it, on a daily basis, for training, to find new wines, new wineries. So yeah, I mean, I think there's huge,
What is
there's a lot
that
of benefits.
website? Could you mention the website for
It's
people to?
rawwine.com, rawwine.com,
All right.
raw.com.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's a fun event, and it's a community event. It's a raw wine. When we come to LA or New York, or we meet so many familiar faces, and I think it's good for the growers who, somebody who's in Spain, who might go to a couple of fairs a year. It's amazing that they can come to New York or LA and meet all the customers, talk to them about the vintage and so on, because not everybody can travel to Spain, or not everybody can travel to Israel, or even parts of California. I think it's just a really efficient, convenient place where you can
Yeah.
just come in and taste hundreds of wines, basically, in 1 or 2 days.
I'm laughing. There are parts of California I can't travel to. Um, um,
But you
so
should definitely pour out raw, Adam. Basically.
thanks. Do you? I mean, just from like, so how big of a logistical challenge is it? Do you have to maintain different licenses in each city where you do raw? Like, are you
We use, I mean, in terms of alcohol licensing, we use local partners.
okay? Yeah,
And a lot of local partners. I mean, I have in the office, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.5. I've got four. It's 4.5, like 4 people and somebody. Well, I've
a
got
part.
4 full-time and then a few part-timers. Yeah, editorial and so on. So it takes a year to organize an event,
Yeah,
like from venue coordination, the working with growers, and getting all the paperwork, all the information and everything. And basically, yes, it takes 12 months. And then we work a lot with local partners for logistics stuff and so
Got
on. But I mean, we've been, it's like now this is my 11th year. I know how many events I've organized. Probably, I don't know, 30, 40, 50. I should count them. And initially it was literally two of us doing everything, including washing glasses overnight. And I mean, I've done everything.
right, right.
Now we do a bit more, and I have an amazing team, so it's a bit more manageable. But it's great. I mean, it's organizing events is always fun. From the venue pulling from under your feet 2 weeks before the event to from the glasses not turning up when we have to hire a truck and cross 2 countries to go and pick up glasses. I mean, we've kind of had it all.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
All that without knowing, or samples regularly getting stuck in the US, at the airport until literally the morning of the event. I mean, this, yeah, you get a lot of white hair when you work in events.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I just remember hearing I was at a conference recently where, some folks from Europe came here and, to get some like a case of wine through customs, somebody just had to sit there for like, 10 hours, like spent their
No,
day just waiting to be processed through customs.
yeah.
Um,
Particularly
yeah,
recently, I mean, it used to be a lot easier, but over the past 2 or 3 years, it's become quite tricky.
yeah, and over the past 2 or 3 years, you've sort of had to pivot. You created a whole online portal for supporting and a club as well. Is that correct? Was that in response to the pandemic, or was that always part of what you were heading towards?
No, I mean, to be honest, it is something that I've always wanted to do, and I should really, I mean, hindsight is obviously a beautiful thing. I should have done it 10 years ago, open an online
Right.
shop and a club, because everybody was saying to me, we want to buy wine and blah blah blah. But then I was so caught up in making raw wine work, and developing it as a business that is sustainable. That I just had no headspace whatsoever for just you know doing anything else. And then obviously the pandemic, arrived, and then I was without income for well over 2 years, but I still kept all my team. And so I just thought, well, this is the time to do all these things. And so we did, the wine shop and then the club. And then this online conference called Alive. That was amazing.
Oh wow.
Um,
Yeah.
where I had like the most incredible lineup of speakers. It was all about the vines and the plants and how they're intelligent and how they communicate and how they feel. But in a way, I think it was amazing, on many levels. But I think it was a little bit maybe too out there. It was not as successful as I was hoping, not from a content perspective, but in terms of audience. So that's why I stopped doing it. But yeah, we had a lot of fun for 2 years. I had my partner and I had a baby during the pandemic. So in a way, that also gave me a little bit of space to spend time with my daughter rather than being always on the road, which is normally what I do. So the
Yeah.
pandemic was a full on full on 2 years for us.
Yeah. No doubt.
That's for sure.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe I should, in retrospect, I should have probably just taken 2 years out, like everybody did. But you don't know when it's going to come back on, right? So yeah, you never know. It's very hard
Yeah.
to plan. Mm.
It was hopefully a once in a lifetime opportunity. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Uh, I've heard
Yeah.
this is maybe a weird question to bring up near the end, but I've heard you mention something I feel like I should do a whole episode on, but the cost that goes into a bottle of wine, pricing, and what really, like, what wine should, how much we should charge for a bottle of wine. I'm realizing the economics are, pretty pretty stark from a producer standpoint. But I've heard you mention this a couple of times. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think fair pricing is a very important conversation, and I think particularly when you end up like in the US, where there are a lot of, you know, there's a lot of add-ons, right? From the time
Yeah.
um, you ship your bottle, between obviously the cost of dry goods now that's increasing massively, the
Yeah.
bottles and so on, to transport, which is also a big problem, to then various importers and distributors and retail margins and so on. And I think that is something which is really important to bear in mind, is that when you can't produce a great wine that looks after the environment and its people, because the people are part of the landscape. And if you support an ethical business, that business will look after its people, and that has a cost. And so expecting to pay, like in Europe, some people routinely will pay, I don't know, €0.50 for a liter of wine, right? Like ex-seller pricing. I mean, that doesn't add
Right.
up. So
Right.
I think buying a bottle of wine for a few dollars, regardless of where it comes from, it means it has been compromised along the way, and which is fine, and I think that's part of our decision. But something which is produced in small scale, that is produced from grapes that are farmed well, with an ethical mindset, you know, will will
Yeah.
will will cost more than you know $20 a bottle for sure. And fair pricing is a very important conversation for sure. And labor, even in California, you've got the issue of I'm sure, you know, cheap
Oh yeah.
labor and
Oh
so
yeah.
on. So yeah, I think pricing is you know don't kid yourself that if you pay, I mean, how much is the cheapest bottle of wine in the US? I mean, can you get something like under $10? I guess you can.
I mean, you can. It's, it will not be, it, I mean, Trader Joe's here is full of under $10 bottles. But yeah, I mean, they're what you'd expect. They're mass produced. Sort of whatever. Just
Yeah,
mass
and I
produced
think that's
industrial
fine,
wine.
because not everybody has $25 to spend on a bottle of wine, and I think we should, that's completely fine. But I think we just need to be aware that of the cost to the environment and to the workers, of
Yeah.
that. So that's why I always say, just drink a little bit less, just drink a little bit better.
Yeah, drink a little less, drink a little better. I love that. That's probably a good. I mean, we're in January. There's probably a lot of people drinking a little bit less this month. Uh, well,
Mm,
any final thoughts? I mean, just really, I want to say, like, I really enjoy your book, and anybody who wants to learn about natural wine should start with your book. Like, it's just such a great intro, as well as diving deep into some of the topics, and just like I said, starting with the farming first perspective, I think is very important, and that's another reason as a great intro to natural wine to start with your book. So that thank you for writing that book, and well done, and yeah,
Thank you.
all recommendations go out for that.
I think what's important is to remember that after all of this, wine is really meant to be, it's just a very simple product. I mean, it is an extraordinary product in that I think grape has this amazing capacity to translate the place where it's from. And that's, not very many fruits, have that capacity. And I think that's which is why wine has captivated so many imaginations, and has become such an intellectual product. But I think at the end of the day, it's really worth remembering that wine is also a simple beverage, and sometimes just needs to be drunk as such, and drinking with our heart and our stomach. And yeah, because I just think that this whole, you know I don't know. I don't think we need to be too divisive, or I would never say don't ever drink anything else or whatever, because these are all personal choices. But remember that wine should just bring a lot of simple but complex pleasures. That's the beauty of wine, is when it's made with respect for the microbiology, both in the vineyard and in the cellar, is just incredible, because it's alive, it speaks to you, and it's such a great connection to nature. It really is, and that's why I love it so much. For me, it really encapsulates everything that I love about nature. Is all the elements are so much greater when they're put together, there is this harmony, there is this exquisite magic that happens in the glass, and that's only possible because of so many different diversity of elements, that have played a role in making it happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very simple pleasure, but it brings so much emotion when you just let it, and that's why I love natural wine, because it has all of that. It is really that pure connection with the vegetal, with the vines, with the grapes, with the soil that enabled it, and it's just a gorgeous translation of what nature is capable of.
Yeah, thanks. That's beautiful. Yeah, I owe wine for reconnecting me to the wonder of nature as well, and I mean that's why I do a lot of what I do as well. I think that connection is extremely important to me, and I think much needed. So thank you for saying that, and thank you for
Mm.
doing this. Thanks. It's been great talking with you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, thank you for hosting the podcast and doing what you do, because it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work to be that consistent, and because you've been doing it for 3 years. I mean, that's pretty incredible. So well
Yeah,
done.
yeah. This
Mm.
is going into the fourth year now. Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And if you did and would like to support this podcast, please do. There is a Patreon link in the show notes where you can subscribe with a monthly, very low subscription to add monetary support. Or please subscribe on your feed, wherever you listen to this podcast. Subscribe and follow this podcast so that you will automatically download it when each new episode comes out. That's one of the few metrics that we can measure to see the support and listenership of this. And otherwise, if you're already listening, subscribe, support, whatever, just a long-time listener, haven't done anything, please do a review. If you would, any positive review with 5 stars and a nice word is fantastic and helpful, and really improves the algorithmic performance of this podcast. So thank you so much.